بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So continuing in our discussion of the logical proofs of the conditions of a Sahih Hadith or a sound Hadith, we had spoken about two already. What were the first two?
Precision.
Okay, good. And
trustworthiness.
And trustworthiness. So these are trustworthiness, adala, and precision, dhabt. How do you gauge somebody's trustworthiness?
Community.
Okay, by asking about him. What else?
Outward religious acts.
Outward religious acts. And why was it so the community is a good gauge of him outwardly. Like, why is it important to see how religious he is or how he practices?
He fears Allah.
Right, so if he apparently fears Allah, we would hope that is a reflection of his internal gauge. So now you have both these external gauges from the community and you have this internal gauge that you hope this person has that will prevent him from what? What are the two things? Every time we have a piece of information, every time we have a khabar or a statement or an action, what are the two things that I'm trying to prove, or what are the two things that I'm trying to avoid when I establish that?
Two things you're trying to avoid?
There's two things I'm trying to avoid every time I deal with a statement or an action or a piece of news. Yeah. Okay, that it's not false. And we said that there are two main reasons that a piece of information or news is usually false. What are those two reasons?
Mistake.
Right, it can either be a mistake or
Mistake just on purpose.
okay, on purpose is what? An on purpose mistake is called what? A lie. Right. So, so if I'm trying to verify a piece of information, there are two things that I'm trying to avoid in that verification. One of them is that there is no lies that are in it, and that the person is has not made a mistake. And we said in order to help us verify that there is not a mistake and that this is a truthful piece of information, there are conditions to this. The first two conditions we had spoken about, which are the trustworthiness and precision. The trustworthiness we spoke about and why that's important, because this is a better gauge of what? From the two, from lying or mistakes, which is this a better gauge of to avoid, to help me avoid? The lying, right? So if I know that this person is trustworthy, there's a less chance of him lying, right? Or in absence of lying. And the precision is important because that's more of a focus on what?
Accuracy.
On accuracy, which is from the two parts, what am I trying to avoid and minimize? Mistakes and errors. Jazakallah khair. So these two things these are the first two conditions that we had put forward concerning the narrators. Now the next part of this is the ittisal, or the connected chain. Now connected chain is something that is very unique to the Muslims, is very unique to Islam. This is not something that you find in other religions. You don't find this even amongst historians. How do historians write history? So if I'm a historian, right, and I want to write about the United States in 1981, what would I do? Okay, I would research. Research is a very broad term, and I don't think it's wrong. Okay, I can talk to people who lived during that era for sure. What else? All right, I have to evaluate those sources, and I have to determine what are primary resources. So what would be considered for you guys a primary resource? So in this day and age, would a newspaper work?
No.
So if I wanted to find out about the year 1981, what was going on, where would I look? Okay, scholarly articles. Okay, that's fine. And you guys are okay with newspapers or no? Well, everybody's kind of talking. Everyone's kind of talking at once. So I'm all I'm hearing is. Yeah. You think it's okay? All right, here, let me ask this question. Who has a problem with newspapers? You do? Okay. And I'm assuming everyone else is okay with it? All right, what is your problem with newspapers?
Who owns it?
Okay, so you definitely do have owners to the newspapers, but does the ownership... you can have these really ill-intent individuals who own these corporations, who own these businesses, but does that make the people who work for them bad? No, right? So Jeff Bezos, he's the owner of Amazon today. Does that make that person who's working in the factory a bad person? Yes, it does, according to Fauci. No, okay. So It doesn't make that individual bad. So the same thing would apply to news. But what does that, if I know who owns it, how does that help me as a reader?
Are you talking about newspaper?
I'm talking about a newspaper, a news outlet, anything, right? There's different ways we consume media today. Like, what is a way we consume media today and get news today that we didn't have access to in the 80s?
YouTube, Instagram,
What do we call all that?
Twitter, social.
We call that social media, right? We call it social media. But even in social media, we have tiers in that too. So the question now comes with the news, because you did mention an important point. If I know the owner of a particular newspaper or a particular news outlet, how does that help me as the researcher?
So you know what to actually, look for in these different outlets.
Okay, what do I want something a little bit simpler. What will that gauge me, help me gauge?
The company's values.
Okay, so
That aligns with yours.
okay, so and what do we call that? There's a term for it.
Work ethics?
Principle?
You guys are getting close. You're like kind of like, you're around it. Close. Bias. Right? So if I know the attitude of an owner of a particular organization, like Rupert Murdoch, you guys know who he is? No? Man, you guys need to step up your news game a little bit. Please inform us, who's Rupert Murdoch? He's not just an investor. He owns a lot of the major news corporations in the U.S. today. Why is it important to understand the owner? Because that owner, is there a certain type of news that he's going to want to push out? Yes.
Basically like Fox News or CBS, like Republicans or Democrats, they try to push
Right. There's a certain
their own agenda.
right. There's a certain narrative that they try to push, and if I understand what the bias is from both of these, I can take the negative and I can take the positive, and then what can I do with it? I can try to reconcile it, and I can come out with like, what is actually the news here? So a very modern example. You guys know, I don't know if those of you have heard that the 50 migrants that were shipped to, to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
How are the different news outlets portraying this? Some of them are saying it's what? It's good, and some of them are saying it's bad. For those that are saying it's bad, why are they saying it's bad?
Are they using people as
They're using right. They're using people as political tools. Right. They're using individuals as political tools, and they're moving them to the space because they're trying to make a political statement. But they don't really care about the people. Type, and the people who are saying this is good, why are they saying it's good?
because so the current administration can see the problem.
Right. So because they're saying the argument is this will help create awareness. You're saying that okay, they're being used as a political tool, but they are being used as a political tool currently in our state. We want to bring this awareness to states that don't have to face and deal with this issue. So do you understand like how you can have a bias from the same piece of news and the same piece of information, but what is the one thing that we can agree upon, whether we see it to be good or bad? What happened? What is my takeaway? That migrants? Well, migrants are suffering, right? Or that's one way of looking at it. What's another thing I could take away from? Like a more factual statement. That people are being moved from one place to another, right? This can be my factual information that I can take away from that, regardless of how I feel about the issue. And if I know the bias of these things, not just is bias, but there's another layer of things when I look at newspapers. Is every newspaper as trustworthy as the next? No. That's where I have to make my own judgment call, and I have to figure out, okay, which newspapers can I trust and which newspapers are less trustworthy. And there's an entire section of newspapers that deals with, what is the word? Gossip. Do you guys know that genre? You guys are kind of young, man. I don't even know if you know. Yeah, TMZ is a good one, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Tabloids. Right, so if you guys, this was more of a thing like when you go to the grocery store, they have a tabloid section. So the tabloid section is like who's dating who, so-and-so, her belly looked a little big, so she's pregnant, and she was seen with this guy. You know what I mean? And it's just pure conjecture. It's just pure conjecture. Can I use those as reliable sources at all? No. Just like we have a grading system for things that we deal with nowadays, it's not very different to how we grade some of the things in the past. And how do we do that? If I ask you guys, like, okay, what do you think about the New York Times? Most of you would be like, well, most of the information is trustworthy, right? Or the Washington Post, or like some of the major news outlets. And there might be some of us who'd be like, no, I don't really, they're far too skewed and far too biased. And some of you might go to more right-leaning politically, right? Some of you might trust Fox News more, or Blaze TV, or like OAN, and some of you might be very vocal about it. And But at the end of the day, these are all different news sources of how people take them. And you have people who are a little bit right of center, you have people who are a little bit more left of center. And it's just important for us to understand how we deal with this information, understanding the biases behind them, so that we can learn to actually take away that concrete piece of news, which in this case is what the Prophet ﷺ said, what he did, or the tacit approvals that happened in front of him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the connected chain. How does this play a role in the news? Do we have, does this chain system exist today? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay, yes, where, and no, where. So, I think yes it does. But how? Yes?
Digital platform.
1 second, huh?
Like when the researchers, the one is such a brand new.
Sure, but that's in research, right? But research is very different than me bringing a piece of information or news. All right, that's more exploration and investigation. You were going to say something?
Yeah, digital platform.
So in digital platforms, how it works. So like when the New York Times reports something, or the Washington Post, when they report something, is it possible that all of them have reporters stationed in all of these places that news is going on? No. But you have a larger organization, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with. What is it called? That actually encompasses all of them. I promise I'm not like a conspiracy theorist. I mean, maybe a little. Have you guys ever heard of the AP, the Associated Press? What is the Associated Press? Man, you guys need to step up your news game, man. Huh? It's not necessarily freelancers. So basically what it is, it's like a conglomerate and a collection of all different news agencies. And what happens is when you guys read an article, many times they'll say that this is taken from, that you'll see in parentheses AP, right, the Associated Press. And this allows them to have a larger net when they report things, because they don't need to have. Is it possible that a news agency has reporters everywhere?
Impossible.
No, it's impossible, right? It's not realistic. Like logistically, it's just not possible. It would cost way too much money. So what happens is that they actually have what's the Associated Press, which is a larger group of associations from these different news agencies that kind of allow them to interuse this news. So when I look at a news article, if I don't see a name and I see Associated Press, this is almost like a chain, right? So where did they get their news from? They got it from the Associated Press. Is the Associated Press a trusted news source? And you can actually subscribe to the Associated Press, by the way. So if you want to bypass a lot of these secondary sources, you can actually subscribe to them directly. So the chain does exist today. It's just not in the same form, because the Associated Press, is it an individual? No, right? It's like a group of different people. Sometimes you don't even know who the article is being taken from, because it's just taken from them at large. And you also have people who are there directly. So sometimes you have people who are working for the Seattle Times, who are there on the ground and they're reporting, and that's important too. But that's close. That's not narrating. That's closer to what? We had spoken about this before. Witnessing. Ahsant. Good. So the connected chain. That every narrator makes clear who he is narrating from, utilizing the tools of narration, indicating precision. Any questions on this? There's some things I want to focus on. He makes clear who he's narrating from, utilizing the tools of narration, and this gives us an indication that this is a precise chain. So here, he makes clear who he is narrating from. Like what? What is a way that I can make clear who I'm narrating from?
Their name.
Using their name, right? So is it enough for me to say, for example, Abdullah? Abdullah told me. Why?
Too many of those.
Right, there are too many Abdullahs. So can I do? But do I need to take 4 generations of his grandparents? No, right? That's not necessary either. I have to give enough information so that when somebody asks me, they're able to identify who it is. But if I just say Abdullah, can you trust what I'm saying? No. Why?
What you doing?
Because which
Abdullah,
Abdullah?
if the person that you're talking to knows Abdullah. But if
All right,
you say
yeah.
Abdullah is my neighbor,
Yeah.
then it's okay, I don't know Abdullah, but I know that I know Iman.
Like Samta. All right.
You have to go far back enough so that the audience knows who that person's referring to.
Yeah. So it is important for me to give context to who this individual is. There's no doubt about that. And if I don't give enough information, it doesn't give me enough context, and we now have a narrator that is known to be majhul. He's unknown. And we had spoken about this before. If there's somebody, like for example, if there's Ahmed outside, do I know him to be a liar? No, but do I know him to be truthful? No, I just don't know anything about him. And it is at that point that I cannot make a ruling on the piece of information. Because I don't know. It's not that I don't trust him, I just don't know him. I don't have enough information about him to actually come to a ruling. And there are two things that can happen. Either I can reject the narration, or I have something that's called tawaqquf. It's where I don't take a stance on the issue until I have more information. So what's the goal? I'm sorry. The tools of narration. What are the tools of narration? So if I said to you guys, Abu Hurairah said. Is that okay? It is, and it isn't. Why is it okay, and why isn't it okay?
It's okay because you know
Because I'm known to be upright. Allahu Akbar. No, Jazakallah khair. I'm sorry. Okay, so no, but I'm saying, Farhan is saying, Abu Hurairah said.
Wasn't there a generally known reference?
Between?
In the Muslim community to begin with. So that's
I'm not.
but
All right.
it isn't also because there was no
Mm-hmm.
other indication than Abu Hurairah.
Said whatever statement is. So if I said to you, Abu Hurairah said that pizza is amazing.
I'll look it up.
Huh? All right, so now you want to. Okay, so there's a few red flags that go off, right? What are some of the red flags?
Is it that you
Like, I'm sorry,
Is it that you didn't say radiallahu anhu?
I didn't say radiallahu an. So there's a chance now that this person is not
Not
the Abu Hurairah, not the companion. If we assume about him that he was, or it was the companion, then what is another problem? There was no pizza during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Pizza wasn't a thing. Well, I mean, like when was pizza?
I can look it up.
Yeah, you can look it up. Khalas. I mean, they might have had manaish, you know what I mean? Like, but so there are a few red flags that you guys became aware of immediately just by hearing it. But if I said to you, for example, Abu Hurairah, he is the one that narrated the hadith about. That's a good example. All right, let me give you an easier example. Umar radiallahu anh, he narrates that actions are based on their attention. 18th century? Oh man, so it's like 1200 years after the Prophet ﷺ. 18th century? Really?
That's when they
Pizza?
called it pizza.
Oh, that's when they called it pizza? Okay, before that, what was it?
Manaish.
It was Manaish? Okay. That's good. Jazakallah khair. I might have to check up on that narration. So over here, what we have is, Umar radiallahu anh, he said that actions are based on their intentions. Right? And this is a well-known hadith. So over here, in this situation, is it okay for me to say that now? That Umar radiallahu anh said. Because now we had said that I made clear who I'm narrating from, and utilizing the tools of narration, or utilizing the words of narration. There's different ways that scholars narrate. And what are some of those tools, and what are some of those ways? What I did now, is it possible that I met Umar radiallahu anh? No, I mean I'm old, I'm not that old, right? So it's not possible that I have met Umar radiallahu anh. It's impossible. So here immediately, what happened to the chain? It's not connected, right? There's a break there. But you also have to look at what am I doing? When I'm saying that Umar radiallahu anh said, am I narrating? Right? That's also a valid question. At this point, am I narrating? No, I'm not. Why? Because the era of narration is? Is it still active? Are we still narrating? No. The era of narration is done. It's finished. Sure. The era of narration is over. Those are all ijazat. Ijazat is a little bit different. It's a little bit different, and I'll talk about that inshallah. But once the hadith were mudawwan, once they were recorded, that's it. The era of narration ended. So for me to say now, Umar radiallahu anh said, and this is something that's very natural, right? It's something that's very natural. So even in the first few generations, many times they didn't mention the isnad. They wouldn't mention the chain of narration, because every time when we speak, do we mention all the 2 or 3 people who are in the middle who we might have heard a piece of information from? No, it's not a done thing. It's not a natural thing. So for the scholars to even come up with this isnad system, this was a genius move on their part, because they're like, okay, we need to figure out a way to actually attribute these things back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we need to have something that we can rely upon to actually trust this piece of information that we're receiving, that is coming to us. So what are the tools of narration? The tools of narration, you have a few. An is one, haddathana is another, akhbarana is another. All of these are different ways that I heard, or I was sitting in the gathering and it was read to me, or I read to the sheikh, or this is on his authority. So these are the different tools of narration that the scholars actually used. And with those tools, it helps us understand whether he sat with that sheikh, whether that sheikh read to him, or whether he read to the sheikh. And these are something that is really, really important. Or something that maybe he didn't hear directly from him. And there are different ways to actually express this. So knowing this individual narrators, it's important to know that. Why? Because we have to trust that they're the ones that relayed the statement, from the beginning of the chain to the end, to make sure that none of the narrators in that chain have been deleted, or a narrator has not been added onto that chain. And we're going to talk about something important. So here, the last part, that if I'm unable to identify a narrator, and we had mentioned one reason why that's a problem. If I can't identify that narrator, what are some other problems that can occur? And how come it's under this section of connected chains? So if I said, Abdullah said, Ahmed ibn Khalid said. This Abdullah we don't know. What are some of the potential problems with this unknown narrator? Right, it's like we don't trust Abdullah, right? Not because he's not trustworthy. We don't know. But what is another potential problem with this unknown narrator? Could he have heard from someone else? Can we trust him to actually narrate on the person who he's claiming to narrate from? No. Is it possible there's 2 or 3 or more people between him and the one who he's claiming to narrate from? Right? All of these things are possible, and this is why the scholars have included in this section, when they talk about ittisal, when they talk about this connected chain. If I'm unable to identify a narrator, then the possibilities open up for multiple things to happen. And there are some exceptional cases, inshallah, which we'll get to, but in general, the moment I have an unknown narrator, I treat it as a what in the chain? I treat it as a break. I treat it as a break in the chain, and this is why you have many hadith that will either be ruled on with weakness, or something that they'll say will stop. Because if I can't identify the narrator, there's no way for me to know what is happening in that section, or what happened before. So this stage is very important in identifying actual individual narrators, and it allows us to apply the previous 2 conditions. How? So we had said that trustworthiness and precision were the true previous conditions. How does this allow us, or how does this condition of ittisal allow us to apply those 2 conditions?
Because we have to qualify.
Because we have to qualify every single person in that chain now. So do you see how one leads into the other? How all of these conditions are actually very logical steps on how I should research and how I should approach these different sections of proving a hadith is sound or not. So this leads us to the ability of placing a ruling on the narrator himself. He can be trustworthy, he can be precise, he can be one or the other, he can also be neither. Right? These are all possibilities. Or he can be what? The one I forgot to put on here. He can be both. So a narrator can be any combination of these things in addition to being both of them. And a narrator who is adil and a narrator who is labit is somebody who we would call thiqa or trustworthy. And this is why an unknown narrator has to be rejected, because we just don't know about that person. We had mentioned that. And we said that it is equivalent to a break in the chain because of the number of possibilities that open up regarding that individual. So here are some narrations I want to share with you. Muhammad ibn Sirin, he said that they would not ask about the chain of narration, but when the great calamity struck, they would ask, name your men. We would look to Ahl Sunnah and take their hadith, and we would look to Ahl Bid'ah and refuse their hadith. This is actually mentioned in Imam Muslim's Muqaddimah. And he also said, same Muhammad ibn Sirin, he said, this knowledge is religion, so look to who you take your religion from. These first 2 narrations, Muhammad ibn Sirin, he died 110. Over here, the fitna, the great calamity. What is he talking about? The mihna happened after this. Because Imam Ahmad, he died 241. What great calamity? What would happen this early, right? He died 110. Ahsant. Not just the Khawarij, who else? The Khawarij in the opposite with who? Their opponents. The Shia, right? The Shia, the Qadiris, the Jahmis. You had a rise of all of these groups. All of them began and all of them rose when?
What's a Khawarij?
Khawarij is extremists, terrorists, people who throw other people outside of Islam because of sins. What is a great what happened? Where did those groups rise? During which era? Even before. Ya akhi, this is khalas, tabi, ya akhi. You know the last companion hasn't died yet? Who's the last companion to die? You guys know? Amr ibn Tufayl. He was the last one to die. He died 120, I believe. So you still have companions, not either late companions or some of the Bedouin companions who are still they're still alive during this time. What era is he talking about? What is this great calamity? Yes? The death of the Prophet. They didn't start asking for isnad that early. But it wasn't, not just was it a calamity, it was the greatest calamity that ever struck the ummah, was his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's no doubt about that. But what is he talking, because he's talking about the calamity that struck that directly related to asking about isnad. And you guys, and he mentions it clearly here, right? He's talking about Ahl Sunnah and Ahl Bid'ah. So clearly there's some kind of relationship there. When did these groups rise? When did they start becoming a problem? Yes?
Was there contact with, like, you're all for different regions? And,
I don't really like that one, man. It's like you know, we Ajam, we come in adulterated Islam. I'm not with that, man. I think the Arab did their own damage. we didn't add to the pot. But that is a narrative. I just thought, I'm not with that, man, at all. I think humans are always going to be humans regardless of where they're from. Saying that, the first group of scholars to rise, a lot of them were Farsi. You guys still tell what calamities happened in this time period? So let's assume he had like a regular life. I don't know when he was born, but let's assume that he died at 70, meaning that he was born when? Math majors. He was born like around 40, right? So if he was born 40 Hijri, what are some of the things that he saw and he experienced? All right, that was at the end, right? So he experienced initially the Khilafah of Muawiyah, right? He experienced the Khilafah of Muawiyah, and it was at the tail end of the death of Ali radiallahu anh and Hassan's taking of the Khilafah. So this calamity that he feels was struck, what was that? Do you think it was the rise of Banu Umayyah? It could be, for sure. Because what happened during the Khilafah of Banu Umayyah? The great calamity, in actuality, was the death, like honestly, the death of Uthman radiallahu anh. It was at that point, which groups started coming into power? You had the Khawarij, they had taken hold. They had caused fitna, and they had split the people. Even the civil war, who was the one who was inciting this war? The Khawarij were inciting it, and the Shia were inciting it. And every time, the problem with Ahl Bid'ah, and we had spoken about this before, when it came to trustworthiness, why is it an issue? Why is it important for me to know where this person stands theologically? The same reason we need to know who owns the news corporation. Why? Because of bias. Because the bias that exists and the bias that's there. And it's something that needs to be and it must be recognized. Because if I understand that bias, it'll help me understand on how to deal with those particular narrations. Imam Zuhri, he said that put chains to your narrations. You narrate to us statements without bits and reins. You guys know what a bit is? A bit and a rein. What is he talking about here? He's talking about horses. So a bit is the piece that the horse actually bites down on, right? Where you put it in their mouth, and the rein is what connects it. If I don't have that on a horse, what's going to happen? It's going to be astray, right? It'll just go wherever it wants. And that's exactly what he's saying here. He said, if I can't tie this down, there's no way for me to determine where I am going, or where this horse has been. Abdullah ibn Mubarak, again, another great scholar, he said, the chain of narration for me is from the religion. Had it not been for the chain of narration, anyone could claim anything. So when it is said, who narrated to you, the religion is preserved. Again, all of these scholars showing the importance of the hadith culture and why we need a sanad, why we need an isnad. I don't even know what I was trying to say. I mean, my vocabulary is good. It's not that good, man. Yes, jazakallah khair. It's indicative. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, because I'm just like, man, what am I trying to say here? So, and the term sanad itself, it actually indicates to us and tells us what the purpose is behind it. The word sanad in Arabic actually means that which is relied upon, something that you lean on. So the thing that I lean on, I want it to be what?
Strong.
I want it to be strong. And it's the same way with the isnad. Linguistically, that which is relied upon, this is my sanad, yani what I rely on. It's an important logical piece of testing the authenticity of a piece of information, keeping in mind the authentication process of seeking a lie or a mistake. Even in a receipt in Arabic, it's also called a sanad. Why? Because it's something I can prove that I made a particular purchase. I'm sorry? Yeah, that's actually. Yeah, no, like fatura is a very common use, but which isn't wrong. But sanad is a better, I would say, description for what it is. Yeah, I mean, like sanad for security, like all of these purposes are definitely there. Right? This is what, because we're relying on what? We're actually relying on our religion. It's through these chains on what we rely our religion on. Like the second biggest source that we have in Islam comes from these asanid. And not just that, you know what else uses asanid very famously in our tradition? Qira'at. What is a qira'ah? Right? The readings of the Quran. The readings of the Quran, a lot of them rely on these asanid. And these are the things that are still carried on until today. Now, as for what you're talking about, these are called ijazas. And ijaza is more of a, it's more of a, I don't want to say cultural, but it's more of a connection to the Prophet ﷺ, and it's more of a witnessing to the authenticity of that book versus a narration of that book per se. So if I have an ijaza to Imam Muslim, this means that this book has been passed down from these people, and a person either read the entirety of it or a section of it, and that person is witnessing this book more than he is testifying to it. Because these people in the chains, even if you look at a lot of their tarajum, but I was like, it's not October yet. So like, so what happens is that these chains, even if you have like a strong or a weak chain, it doesn't matter how strong the ijaza is.
So
Because it's because it's not. Does it prove that the book exists? Like for example, if you have like all these people who have ijazat in Muslim or in Bukhari or in different riwayat or in different books, it's great. You know, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's something that's good. But saying that this ijaza, what is it telling of? Does it actually say? Is this a proof that the book exists? Think about that.
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Is it an additional proof that it's a real book and that this person actually authored it? For sure. But that's not something I would rely on to say like, oh, this book is real because of all these ijazat that are there.
That's not what we're doing there.
So ijaza, it's actually considered the weakest way of carrying a hadith. They used to have ijazat, you know, very early on in the hadith culture, and it's when they would actually give their books to the scholar of hadith in order for him to narrate from it. The next one is Adam Illah, which is the lack of hidden defects. Inshallah, we'll talk about this next time. And I'll take questions after the adhan, and then inshallah we'll come back after salah for the tazkiyah class. What are some ways that I can prove it?
The previous narrators?
Okay, what about them?
Mass transmitted.
That's different. Something being mass transmitted is different. But in these individual chains, how do I prove that they're connected? Yes?
There's like other chains going through them.
Okay, so that's definitely corroborating proof, right? If I see parallel chains with them, because what are the chances that somebody made up like this elaborate, this elaborate scheme of trying to get all these chains, right? I definitely think that's I think it's more of a secondary proof, though. What else? Yes.
If the narrator knows the previous person in the chain, is less likely to.
Sure. How do I establish that?
Through
Hold on. I want you to think about it.
They met, they sat together in gathering.
Okay, that they met. Sure. How do I establish that? How do I determine these things? What are some of the tools that I need? We take pride in the connected chain, but can we prove the connected chain? Yeah, it is the Sanad, but how do I prove it? Cosman, yeah, put you guys all in check of your deen. Yeah. I'm sorry?
You have to like rely on other people who proved it before.
I like this. It's a good cop-out answer.
Going to start the origin.
Yeah. I'm just asking, Akhi. So if I have a chain of narration, like in front of me, how do I know that all these people met? How do I know that all these people heard from each other? Yes, you're going to say something, Nabi?
I was just going to ask if your question was how do I know that two people met?
Yes, sure. I'm sorry? You can ask their friends, okay?
Or people in their community.
If people in their community? Yes, for sure. Well, now we can't, right? Because everybody's dead. So I think it might be a bit challenging.
Oh, you mean now how we do it?
Yeah. How do I do? Like, how do I establish that these narrators even met, or that they heard from each other? Yes.
the first 2 points.
Okay, so this helps me now determine that they're not lying and they're not mistaken, for sure, right? Or lessens the probability of a mistake. So the fact that he's truthful, what does that help me with? What else do I need to look at? Because now we're getting into more primary reasons. What is one of the things that we had talked about very initially? That the way people transmit tells us what? If I say haddathana akhbarana, what does that tell me as the reader? How it was received. This person is directly telling me either I was sitting in this gathering and I heard the sheikh reading to me, or I read on the sheikh himself. This is something that allows me to trust that person. Other supporting evidence is that I can actually go through and read the biographies of many of these people, that this person is a student of this person. And if I see from the list of his students that this person is not mentioned, does that now put me in doubt on whether he heard from him or not? Yes, it does. Or that this is his sheikh, right? So in all of the books of Tarajim, right, in all of the books that talk about these biographies, you will actually have the narrator, his entire name, his kunya, right, his nickname, where he lived, when he died, and then you'll have a list of what? What else? What other information do you think is important? Yes?
How righteous they were.
All right, that's definitely part of it. That's definitely part of it. Huh? Well, all of these things, right? So you're talking about his righteousness, his precision, maybe examples of that, but what else? What other information do I need? Right, who he's associated with, when he was born. Like when he was born is usually not as important as when he died, but sometimes that's mentioned too. His teachers. So you'll have a list of his teachers. You'll have a list of who else? His students and the people who heard from him. You'll have sometimes also example narrations. They'll say, and these are some of the hadith that this individual narrated. And that will give us confidence in who he is, who he heard from, and an example of some of the narrations that he actually has. So these are all different tools to help us establish on whether this person heard from him or not. But if he's narrating from a sheikh, I don't see from those lists of mashayikh, does that mean that he didn't narrate from them? Or from him? Not necessarily, right? Because those are mentioned as maybe his most famous teachers, or the people who he most famously narrated on. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible that he narrated on other than them, or he had students other than the ones that were listed. It just gives us more confidence when we see both of those things there. So these are all ways to establish whether he heard from them or not. And again, the most important thing is the tools on how a hadith is narrated to us. And if we understand that he either heard it in a majlis or he read it on the shaykh, this helps us understand that that they actually heard. And he actually sat and he actually listened. And in addition to that, we had talked about knowing that when he died. Why is that important? Right, because if you say, okay, as long as there's a chance that the shaykh and a student, yarhamukallah, as long as there's the chance that there's a shaykh and a student, that they lived in the same time period, that gives me trust that I can. Right? It's like, okay, as long as there's a chance that they've met, then now I can actually take this hadith with more, it's not impossible that they met, so that'll give more strength to how I grade and how I deal with that hadith. Exactly. Any other questions?
So if
Yeah.
someone, based on what you just said, like we're all in class and we listen to the parasha,
Yeah.
and someone watched that on like IGTV or something like that, does that make, like there's no way to verify that this was done online? Like, that Farhan said versus Iman said that Farhan said.
How...
We know Iman was in class on September 20th.
So they even would have, they have these books called Imali. And basically what would happen is at the end, when they finish reading the book, they would actually start listing the students who sat and who listened. But it's amazing, like how precise a lot of these things were, where they would be like, okay, and we finished reading this book on the shaykh on this day, and fulan and fulan and fulan and fulan and fulan and fulan, they were all present in the gathering, and so and so was present, but he was sleeping. No, like I'm telling you, like to that extent. Right. Then because when you hear it from this narrator now, you'd be like, okay, yeah, this guy was asleep at the majlis, man. Like, or is it possible he just slept at that majlis, or is that something that he constantly did? Again, this is just, the more information you have, the easier it is. As for what you're saying, this would be more qualified. Be like, I heard it from him in class, and the person be like, I heard it on him through IG. Now, would that take away from the weight of either? I think maybe hearing it on social media, because sometimes the voice isn't as clear, right? You know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of other things. The conversation that I have with you guys during class, sometimes that doesn't get through, right? It's like versus me just speaking. So all of these things would be taken into account. Again, in whatever constraints there were at that time, those were taken into account, and the constraints that we have today, those would be taken into account when we deal with this witnessing, when we deal with narration. Make sense? All right, jazakumullah khair. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. See you guys after Salah, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. The virtue of forgiveness and good treatments. Al-afu wal-ihsan. What comes to mind when we talk about forgiveness and when we use the word, we use the term forgiveness?
Say that again?
What does forgiveness mean?
Like the paper?
Yes.
Human forgiveness or God forgiveness?
Forgiveness.
No, if someone makes you
Okay.
someone treats you wrongfully,
Yeah.
and you forgive them and don't have interest.
Okay, so it's a reaction to what has been done to you. And okay, so when I forgive someone, what does that mean?
That means I have no grudge, so I forgive.
I'm not going to forgive against you.
Yes.
Okay, you're not going to hold whatever it is against them. Where? In front of Allah.
Yes.
But what if I ask for my money back? Did I forgive them or no? So he stole my money from me, and I'm like, okay, I forgive you, give me my money back.
No, you can forgive without getting.
You can forgive the conduct, but you need your probably your goods.
I'm sorry?
If you want your money, but
Uh-huh.
you forgive that he stole it from you,
Okay.
that you are forgiving the action which was haram
Okay.
in the sight of Allah.
Yeah.
But you will not. You still want your goods.
You still want, okay.
Or I have a choice to forgive for both. Like,
Okay.
Keep
Clear.
the money and then forgive you.
Mashi. What were you saying, Ops?
No, we're saying like, it's possible to forgive and let them keep the money. But
Yeah.
It could happen.
I mean, maybe. I don't know.
It's possible.
Yeah. Yes.
You gotta be kind.
You have to be kind? So what does that mean?
Be kind to people,
Like how?
Not have spite.
Like let them, like give them money?
yeah.
Harder.
There's a problem with that. Like if I forgive, they might do it again.
You can forgive
Sure.
and set boundaries.
Okay. So how do I forgive and set boundaries?
You can keep your distance from that person, or you can
Yes,
choose
sir.
not to give that person money again. If you give your money, you return it.
So what you're proposing is forgiveness with a change in the nature of the relationship. But that's still forgiveness. Okay.
Are you asking the question so we can say something like, you can forgive the person in the dunya, but not the akhirah, vice versa, or both?
Okay. Sure. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Like you can forgive the person here, like, okay, I forgive you. Does that mean giving the money back?
I don't know. I'm asking.
I don't know either. I'm
Okay.
asking.
Yes. Tfadal.
Can I forgive and still give the money back?
I don't know.
Well,
That's-
you got the money back.
I'm just curious. Is that forgiveness? So what Zamzam saying is that you can forgive the action, but not necessarily the
The stolen thing.
the stolen the wrong. Okay, so forget money. Somebody hit me.
I still.
Do I hit back?
the same.
It's the same?
Yes, he hit me. That's the wrong action. Besides
Can I hit him back and forgive him?
I mean, you took
Yeah, that's
revenge.
yes, but if we're talking about Allah's eyes,
Uh-huh.
it is fair to you to forgive the action and also the wrong things that
And-
do an act.
Okay.
But if you took revenge, it's not forgiveness.
But if I take the money, is it
But
forgiveness?
it's still allowed. Wasn't it like the lowest of the things
You're
that
able
we
to
can? It was like you can oppress back and it's the lowest, but it's still
Yeah.
allowed.
Yes.
Do scholars differentiate between sulah and forgiveness?
They're different things, right? Sulah is bringing people together, and forgiveness is when it involves me personally. So as sulah, either you can do it as a first party, or you can do it as a third party. But afu is something actually happened to me. So you guys mentioned a few things. Some of them separating between the action, the deed. You guys also talked about rights being taken. And I think you guys are more comfortable with financial rights being returned than other ones. Like, so, what's another good? Somebody steals my car for a couple weeks. And then they give it, yeah. Or I catch them, right? I catch them and I'm like, hey, give me my car. And he's like, all right, here.
You can still sue though.
Huh?
You can still sue.
So over here, there's no money that was taken. And what if now the gas tank it was like on empty before, but now it's full, but it has 200 more miles on it.
So that's still
I mean, he stole it,
He stole miles.
right? How? Because stealing is what? Taking somebody's right or property without permission, right? With permission is different, but without permission it's not. So if there's no consent, then it's going to count as stealing. But is there any way for him to return those 200 miles to me?
Financial compensation.
Oh wait, some dates.
Some dates, right? I can milk the car. What are you saying?
No, that's something I would have thought like mentally like gas, like how do you compensate, but I wouldn't have gone so far as to be like, how are they going to pay me back for my mileage?
I mean, mileage is wear and tear on the car.
Yeah, it is.
What if it's 200 miles that he drove uphill on a rocky road?
Or
Yeah, you're gonna say something?
he can get you a new engine.
He can get you a new engine. Wow. What, that's a serious demands for 200 miles. That's like super petty. That's so petty. But yeah, stealing is petty. That's true. So I mean, there are some things that become gray, right? So when you're talking about, there can be abuse to the person, there can be abuse to the property, or there can be like an actual recompense. Like, so if somebody steals $200 from me and they spend it, and then they give me another $200, have they returned my right or no? Yeah, they have, right? Am I going to ask for the, like, is it from my right to ask for the same bills? Like, no, these are 50s. I wanted 20s.
No.
Like, if you want to be difficult, but here, remember how we had talked before about how the oppressor can actually become the oppressed, right? And vice versa. And how like fine that line can become. And I think that's part of it, right? If somebody's giving me back 50s and he stole all the 20s from me, I might be upset because I wanted loose, you know what I mean? Loose change. But is it fair for me to do that? No. Just because I've been hurt, it doesn't allow me now to hurt someone else. So forgiveness does have stages. I mean, I agree with what a lot of you guys said. Is it possible that I forgive the person in the akhirah, but not in the dunya? Like what? Can you give me an example?
I believe there's no forgiveness if you. I mean, we're talking about in the sight of Allah. If I forgive you in the dunya but have to correct you after, what's the purpose?
So when does that happen?
You know, you can either, if you don't forgive the person in akhirah, Allah will keep that person
Accountable.
to bring in front of him, both of you.
I understand what you're saying, but my question is when does that happen? That I forgive him in this world, but I don't forgive him in the next? Yes.
Can I say like that?
The person dies.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that pain is still
Sure.
your experience in the dunya.
Yeah.
After you forgive them of the fact that they probably
That's fine. Well, I'm talking about the reverse situation. I agree with what you're saying. I'm talking about the reverse. Yes.
When there's nothing that can be done about it.
You're gonna have to speak up a little bit.
I said when there's nothing that can be done about it, so you just forgive it and just say, we're going to do Allah.
Okay, so I want to explore that a little bit. When nothing can be done about it, am I forced to forgive? I want you guys to think about this. Yes.
Like if somebody kills somebody else,
Yeah.
you can use it, you can forgive them in this world.
You can forgive them in this world, but not in the hereafter? Okay.
I mean, you forgive them in this world, but
How do you forgive them in this world?
you don't take money or something.
You don't take money.
Yeah.
Okay. I would argue that the reverse only happens is because you're socially pressured. Meaning that if someone takes my money, be like, hey, come on, man, you should forgive him, miskeen. You know what I mean? Like it was only $20. Just forgive him. Why are you asking for the money back? It's not even that much. Like you can't buy anything with $20 nowadays. And what do I feel pressured to do now? Forgive him. What's going on in my heart though? There's still a lot of resentment. I'm still hurt. I still have a lot of resentment. I haven't navigated it. Like I haven't dealt with it well. And usually these situations happen because you're pressured. So when you were talking about like when you don't have a choice, the problem is we do have a choice, but we're not willing to make it because of all these pressures that we face with. One of the most common things are social pressures. Also, and some of those social pressures are spiritual, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "In ta'fu wa tasfahu," you know, you should be forgiving, you should overlook. Why are you being so petty? Like, come on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive you? Doesn't sound very strange, does it? Yes?
In that case then, is it not in your record that like
you forgave the person?
You didn't actually forgive the person. That's the problem. Because if I'm still carrying something around in my heart, because a forgiveness is actually removing that from my heart. It doesn't mean that I don't change the nature of the relationship. Like, for example, and this happens in a lot of institutions, unfortunately. If I know that this teacher, he touched one of the kids, is it possible that the parents forgive him? Yeah, right, it's possible. Or it's even possible that the child forgives him or whatever. But does it make sense to put him in a similar position again? Absolutely not. Right? So the nature of the relationship changed, even though that there is forgiveness there. And at that point, the anger might be gone, but what might stay? So resentment is more anger, right? Like distrust. Like I think the pain. I think the pain stays, right? It's very difficult to remove the pain, and I think that's part of grieving. And grieving takes time, right? Grieving is not. It's not an easy process. And is it okay for me to carry that pain for my whole life, or do I have to let it go? You can. It's not a bad thing. Yeah, so how many of you have had a death of a close friend or a family member at any point in your life? Like when you remember that person, how does it feel?
Sad.
You feel sad. Meaning that you're still what?
Hurting.
You're still carrying that sadness. It still hurts. Like every time you remember that person, you might have moments where you remember them out of happiness, for sure. But a lot of times we still carry that sadness with us. Like, is it detrimental to our lives? It can be when? Right, if you consume yourself with it, like if everything you are consumed with, because even the Prophet ﷺ, why did he set mourning to 3 days? And what does that mean? Does it mean that I can't mourn on day 4 or day 10 or year 7? No, I can continue mourning, but what are those 3 days for? Right, physically, I have an excuse not to work. I have an excuse not to, whatever my responsibilities to other people are, for those 3 days they can be excused. My responsibilities toward Allah, they will still stand. So if I have to make zakat and it's during my mourning period, I have to what? I have to pay it. If it's prayer time, if it happens during Ramadan, I still have to fast. Right? It doesn't excuse me from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rights, but can it delay me giving the rights of others? Right. Or it can actually prevent me from fulfilling certain rights during that time. Yeah, so for example, if a wife loses her son, does she now have an excuse to go in front of her husband if her husband wants to be intimate with her?
Yes.
Or she has an excuse, right? And it's a valid excuse because she is mourning, even though the intimacy is from the rights of the husband. So these excuses definitely can be presented. These excuses can be put forward. And this is what mourning is, but it doesn't mean that you cannot mourn after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Right? Because mourning is something that can always continue. The only thing it can't do, it can no longer be used as an excuse. It can't prevent us from actually interacting, working, dealing. And if it is, then there's a bigger problem that needs more mu'alaja. It actually needs more direction and it needs more care. Another part of forgiveness. So this is why I feel we're forgiving in this world and not in the next, is because there's still some resentment there. It's an unresolved. Like, what if I am in a situation where I was forced to forgive someone and I didn't want to? No, okay, so I need to understand that what I've done is not really forgiveness, but now I'm kind of stuck. And who put me in this situation? Myself. I can't blame other people. I put myself in the situation. But now that I put myself in the situation, what should I do? Huh? Unapologize, right? You go back and be like, I take it back. I really don't forgive you. But honestly, is that an option? Where you can go to the person and be like, hey, listen, I felt like I was pressured, but I don't think I can forgive you. You can, right? Like, I felt I was pressured and I'm sorry, I can't forgive you. It's a possibility. What else can I do?
You force yourself.
You can force yourself, right? You can, because this idea of forgiveness and this idea of introspection, it really is a personal thing. And I really can introspect, and I can really force myself to come to terms with those things.
I wanted to ask a question.
It's well done.
Okay, if somebody does over and over again, step your boundaries or hurt you.
So that's your,
Over and
yeah.
over again.
That's
You forgive the person.
that's
finally you decide.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you said it by mouth, as
Yeah.
you said, but your heart is not really forgiving.
So what do you guys think? If I forgive somebody over and over again and they keep overstepping the boundaries, what's going on? Huh? That's my fault.
That's your fault.
Yeah.
But what if finally, if I don't forgive, I mean, will that be a problem for me?
So as long as so the thing is, we had talked about this before. When it comes to interacting with others, we're always exploring. And what are we exploring? Boundaries, right? Like we're exploring each other's boundaries. If the first interaction somebody oversteps, then that's my opportunity to what? To say something. I can say something and be like, hey, listen, I didn't like the way that you said this. Please don't talk to me like that. I've had people in my personal interactions where they'll say something, they're like, I was just joking, and my response is usually, I don't joke like that. And when I say that, what happens? Right? That person will take it more seriously, and are they going to try to transgress that bounds again? No. Right? Like, it's less likely, right? And the chances that they do that means that this person doesn't what? He doesn't respect me. And it's at that point I need to make a choice. Because the thing with friendships is, and it's very different from other relationships, friendships are completely what? They're completely optional. The sad thing is with us, man, we treat friendships as many times more important than our family relations. Like we will refuse to, like we look so much for the social acceptance that we'll completely overlook our families. But it should be the other way around. Like we should be more forgiving with our families than we should with our friends. Yes?
Same thing she said, but like what is family?
If it's family, it's different. So even with family, and we had talked about this before, when I am trying to keep a relationship with family, is it bad? Am I not maintaining family relationship if I'm only meeting them on Eid? I want you guys to think about this. Am I not, if I'm every Eid I make an effort to reach out and to get everyone together, am I maintaining family ties or no?
Yes, you can.
I am. So this we use this term maintaining family relations. Does it mean I have to meet them every week? No. And this is what we have in our head. When we talk about maintaining family ties, many times what we have in our head is like, oh man, we have to meet them every week. But that's not the case. The only time, and I'll get to you, the only time where this becomes a problem is if I'm actively trying to avoid that family member. And when am I allowed to actively avoid a family member?
More harm than good.
Right, when it's more harm than good. Ahsant. Good. Yes, تفضل.
You say it's like different depending on what family, like what the nature of the relationship is, like if it's your parents versus
Yeah, your siblings.
siblings.
Like, where is my obligation toward? Is my obligation toward my parents or to my siblings? To your parents. And then your siblings would come after that. So we can qualify many of our relationships. So for example, if I have a wife and kids and I have my parents, who takes the first responsibility? My wife and kids. Why? Because this is something that I voluntarily got into and I created. And now that I have this, they are my first obligation. Saying that, it becomes a little bit more problematic when? Like, what if my parents are ill? Right? If my parents are healthy and independent and I have money, every time I get a paycheck, should I send half of it to my parents? No, right? Why not? No, but I'm saying you guys say logically it doesn't make sense. Like, why? Because my first obligation is who? Is to my wife and my kids. What if my parents are ill?
As much as you are able.
But not just as much as I'm able. Like, and I definitely do agree with that. But now the shift in obligation changes. Because now, even if I'm giving them $10, it's reached a point where I'm now, what? Obligated to help them. And that's if they can't take care of themselves. Because now the responsibility is falling onto me. But if they're healthy and they're independent, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve and protect all our parents and have mercy on all those who have passed. But these individuals, now that if I have to contribute in some way, shape, or form, if they can't independently. But the first obligation is always going to be to your family. So the meaning of forgiveness is when a right is due to forego said right, whether it is a physical or a fiscal punishment. And this is something that you guys had mentioned. That forgiveness happens as a reaction, right? Can I forgive someone before they do anything? No, right? There has to be. It's like accepting a marriage proposal before you get it, right? So, and this is separate from forbearance or suppressing rage, because these are withholding. right? These are withholding mechanisms. They're not actually reaction mechanisms. Does that make sense? Right. So when I show forbearance or I suppress rage, what am I doing? I'm just stopping myself. I'm not actually acting, right? I'm not actually reacting. I'm not actually doing anything. And this is why he categorizes it separately. This is why he made a chapter about afu. This is why he made a chapter about forgiveness. And then he uses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says, خُذُوا الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرُوا بِالْعُرْفِ, that hold to forgiveness, command what is right. And when ta'fu أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى, that waving your right is nearer to godliness, right? Is nearer to taqwa. And then there are a few hadith that we shared here, that charity does not decrease wealth, no one forgives another except that Allah increases his honor, and no one forgives another for the sake of Allah except that Allah raises his status. So this is about the importance of forgiveness, and that it should be a character trait that we try to embody to the best of our ability. And the reason for that is because it makes us lighter people. It makes us individuals who don't thrive on spite and hate and anger and all of these negative feelings that really are things that drag us and they slow us down. They're like anger. They're like anchors. And if we truly want freedom, and if we truly want to feel happy, if we truly want to feel blessed, then we have to try to remove those things as best as we can from our hearts. I never saw Allah's Messenger take revenge for an outrage committed against him as long as none of the sacred prohibitions of Allah were violated. But if there was any violation of the sacred prohibitions of Allah, he would be enraged. Whenever he was given a choice between two matters, he would choose the easier of the two, provided it was not conducive to sin.
What was the last one?
Huh.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. When the Prophet ﷺ was given two choices, if one of them had sin, what would he choose?
The less sin?
He would choose the one with no sin.
Oh.
Right? Even if it was what? No. No, absolutely not. It was even if it was more difficult. So if he was, if he was given two choices, and this one was really hard, and this one was really easy, but this one had sin in it, what would he choose? He'll choose the really hard one. But if he's given two things that are mubah, two things that are permissible, and this one is easy and this one is hard, what is he going to do? He's going to choose the easy one. An example of this that a lot of people, they say like, oh, when we make Hajj, I'm going to choose the one where I have to walk and I have to go through all this. I'm like, dude, choose the easiest one. Like, Hajj is already difficult. If you can afford a nice package, buy a nice package. Why are you going to add difficulty to yourself? And if I'm making Hajj, if I can maximize my ibadah by sitting in air conditioning, and I can maximize it by eating well, if I can maximize it because I don't have to walk too much and I have like boils on my feet, am I going to be more worried, like if I start getting blisters on my feet, am I going to be more worried about the pain, or am I going to be able to focus? I'm going to worry about the pain. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you means and has made it easy for you, take advantage of the ease. It doesn't make sense for me to bring hardship upon myself. I am not here to test me. Allah does that. Right? And you know the difference between me and Allah? Allah knows my limits. Do I know my limits? No. And many times I don't. We think we know our limits, but how many of us have gone to the gym and worked out and thought we couldn't do as much, but we end up doing more? Why? Because we assume about ourselves on what we can do. Or we think that we can only study so long, or we think we can only work so long. And then we break those molds time and time again because we think we know ourselves, but when we really don't. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows us truly. Abu Darda was asked, who is the most honored of people? He said, the one who is able to forgive when given the opportunity. Forgive so that Allah may honor you. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, whoever supplicates against the one who has wronged him has triumphed. Ibn Mas'ud. And why is this important? How is this a sign of forbearance or forgiveness?
You're asking Allah.
Because you're asking Allah. You're not actually what? You're not taking action against the person. Ibn Mas'ud said that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, it is not appropriate for a governor to carry out a punishment unless it is established. Allah is forgiving and loves forgiveness. He then recited, وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَهُ, that let them pardon and let them forgive. So over here, established meaning that it's proven, right? It's proven that this individual actually committed the crime. Don't rush to make judgment and try to give people an opportunity so that you can forgive them. And even when we deal with each other, like it's very important for us to think well and think good of other Muslims, and it's very important for us to think good of other people. if we walk around and we're constantly doubting other people, we're constantly doubting their beliefs, we're constantly doubting their intentions, we're constantly doubting who they are, what kind of person am I going to be?
Doubter.
I'm going to be a doubter, right? So, but why is that a bad thing? I'm sorry? Yeah, okay, so me being skeptical of everyone, why is that a negative thing? How come I shouldn't be? Just like a lot of bad stuff. Does bad stuff happen or no? Right, how come, like you're telling me I should trust people? Okay, why should I have husn al-dhan? What have the people done for me that I should trust them? Trust should be the default. Okay, why? Yes.
I think that you're letting shaitan lead you, because if you are suspicious about the person, but everything they're doing,
Okay, so you're saying that the skepticism is actually shaitan inspired.
Yeah.
I agree. Huh? Okay, so we have a skeptic over here. Yes.
Everybody acting like that.
Huh?
This would be a terrible place to live.
Okay, why?
Constant anxiety.
Society couldn't operate.
All right, society couldn't operate, for sure. So there has to be a base level of trust that we have with each other and we have with others. I definitely do agree with that. The question comes, on what basis do I trust others? And what is the difference between trust and naivety?
Imagine putting your money in a bank.
Hmm?
You know nothing. Like you don't know anybody.
If I don't know anyone, where?
We have trust to the extent that we're like putting all of our money in like banks.
Well, why do we trust banks?
There's like a system.
Well, not just there's a system, like everybody does it, right? So we're like, well, everybody can't be wrong. Like, do people get into car accidents? And this is something that we witness, right? You know, how many of us like rubberneck, every time we see an accident? So we know that car accidents happen. Has it stopped any of us from buying cars or driving them? No. Well, maybe some of us, right? So, but in general, everybody has a car. But I'm saying that we see a lot of these things that do bring distrust in either institutions or functions or systems, but we still engage in them. Why? All right, necessity is definitely part of it. I agree. But I would say that facilities have changed. And nowadays, like with Instacart and delivery, do I really need to leave my house? But it means I have to trust the people who are bringing the stuff, right? But you guys still haven't told me, why is this wrong? Yeah, to be constantly suspicious. Why is it wrong? You said it's shaitani, and I don't disagree with that. But my question is, all right, why is it a bad thing? Why is it shaitani? How come we can't say, no, this is actually how we should be? Yes?
Like, most of the time, people are telling the truth. So
okay.
If lying is a bad thing, it's like away from the ordinary.
Okay, so you would say that in general, people are good?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Yes. Now I'll get to you. Go ahead.
I just think to prove you guilty, I guess, typically.
Why?
Give you a reason to mistrust.
Okay, so you're saying that the default is like what, I'm sorry. Astaghfirullah. This is with the W, right? Samira, yes. All right, the default is what Samira said is trust, and they have to do something to prove their trust. But I'm saying, how did that become the default? I think he's given a good reason that most people do speak honestly. Yes?
I was just going to say that it leads to arrogance when you're always, yeah.
No, mashallah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it leads to arrogance when you're always having bad opinions of others because you're holding yourself to a higher standard.
Right, because if everybody else is here, where am I?
You're higher.
Right?
So you're arrogant.
Right? If I'm looking at everyone at this level, that means that I'm standing above everyone. Absolutely. That's definitely a huge part of it. So this idea of arrogance, this idea of being doubtful in others when that's against the norm, right? To have all these things. What happens to a person who's like that? What kind of lifestyle do they have? Is that person happy? No. Generally not. Generally this person is completely unhappy. And it comes to the point where now these start consuming him, and at what point does he stop? He doesn't. Right? He just you go down into this black hole and you just start doubting everything. And it's not a healthy place. Huh? Like mentally, spiritually, physically, right? So if I never leave my home, is that good for me? No. I mean, look what happened in the past 2 years. How many more people are sick now than they were before? No, very honestly. How many more people are sick now than they were before the pandemic? Why? The brothers come to, man, the pandemic really did a number. I'm like, why? What happened? I gained like 30 pounds. No. People just 30, mashallah. It's like he was a beginner.
He's a rookie.
He's a rookie. He doesn't know how to pandemic right. So like, so I mean, people gained weight. People stopped exercising. Like some of the places, the gyms were closed. You know, and the people were scared to go outside. And what kind of effect has that had? Like we've seen the effect that it has when we start. And what is the basis for all this? Doubt. Because what happened to all of us? We were scared to be around who?
Each other.
We're scared to be around other people. Which is terrifying. That at what point did we become a society where we actually started doubting each other? Hugely problematic. Hugely problematic. We wouldn't trust each other. And look at the breakdown of society that happened the moment we stopped trusting each other. I hope we learned. Ibrahim at-Taymi, he said, whenever a man oppresses me, I have mercy on him. And here Imam Ghazali, he says that this is ihsan, that is driving this forgiveness, so that his heart does not busy itself with Allah's disobedience of oppression. So that if he is asked on the Day of Judgment, he would not have to answer anything that had to do with this oppression. He forgave to the point where he did not even want this oppression touching his heart. This is how negative a characteristic he viewed it to be. And this is how he wanted to distance himself from it. Some of the scholars, they said, whenever Allah wants to weaken a slave, He orders that he be presented with someone to oppress. What do you guys think about that? Right, it's a test. It's a test that He puts somebody who is in a weaker position than you. Because if somebody with a weaker position than me is put in front of me, many times what happens? Right, we will take advantage. And this is why we should not put others in those situations. And even when there are positions that open up, and this is something else that we spoke about before. If there is a position that opens up and I am qualified, I am what? What is the ruling for me to take the position? I'm obligated. Why?
Someone less qualified
forget that.
It could be an oppressor that could take the spot of oppressor.
I agree with all of these things are right? There's a chance for those things. But what am I doing by not filling it? I'm creating a vacuum. I'm creating a vacuum. And the moment we create vacuums, there's going to be power that fills that void. Always. And if we don't take responsibility, then we will have people who fill those voids, and they're not doing it because they're qualified. They're doing it because why? Because they're taking advantage, they want power, and they want authority. A man came to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and complained to him about another oppressing him. Umar said to him, to meet Allah and be oppressed in the same state is better than to meet Him than if you had belittled Him. Meaning that it's very easy for that power dynamic to shift. If it's something that you can bear, and it's not overt oppression, set your boundaries and move on. Otherwise, if you try to respond, many times what's going to happen? If somebody punches me, is it possible that I punch him with the equal force that he hit me with? Is it possible his body's going to react the same way my body reacted to that hit? No. Right? There's no way to gauge any of these things. And we talk like, yes, a person has a right to do that, he can respond, etc., X, Y, Z. At the end of the day, that balance is a very fine level. And it's very easy for the oppressor, or for the oppressed to become the oppressor. A monk entered upon Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, to who Hisham said, do you see Dhul Qarnayn as a prophet? He said, no, but he was given 4 qualities. Whenever he was able to, he forgave. Whenever he made a promise, he fulfilled it. Whenever he spoke, he was truthful, and he would not put off anything until tomorrow. I read this and it kind of shook me. But the opposite of this is what? In Islam, what did the Prophet ﷺ say the opposite of this? He said these are hypocrites, subhanAllah. He said that the opposite of these characteristics is that this individual is a hypocrite. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Well, not this, except this last one. This last one I think is a great characteristic. So. Some of the scholars said that hilm, or forbearance, is not showing it when oppressed or waiting to be oppressed and taking a revenge. Hilm is whenever one is oppressed, shows it, and when he is able to, then he forgives. Right? So he restrains himself and then he reacts appropriately. In that restraint, he actually sits down and he contemplates and he learns to channel this in an appropriate way. Ziyad said that ability takes away from al-hifadha, which is spite and hatred. I mean, and look at all these negative characteristics that Ghazali focuses on throughout these chapters. And it's just to remove those anchors from the heart, and in order to lighten the heart. And the lighter the heart is, the better we will deal with ourselves, the better we will deal with others, and the more open relationship we'll have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the reality is, when we start doubting others, when we start doubting people, it prevents me from being vulnerable. Right? It prevents me from actually sharing information. It prevents me from seeking counsel. It prevents me from becoming a better person because I can't engage with others. In this idea of khuluq, and this idea of taqwa, and how closely tied they are, if I can't build relationships with others, and these are people who I can see doing good for me, these are people who I can see contributing to my well-being, how can I build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who's given me things which I can't see directly. If I can't be thankful for those direct things, how can I be thankful to the indirect ones? Yes?
I never heard about forgiveness.
Yeah. Oh.
And then yeah,
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't forgive somebody that you could forgive, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does it say about me as a person? And you know, in saying that, it's like, I don't want to make a blanket statement and be like, oh, you know, you have to forgive. I mean, there are people who survived rape. There's people who've had their parents killed in front of them. There's people who had their children killed in front of them. There's, you know, there are evil things that happen. So I don't want to put, like, you know, a blanket statement out there that, oh, you know, you should be forgiving in every situation. Like, really, really bad things happen. And in those situations, like, you know, there's an appeal to taqwa that I have, but can I force that person at that point? No. Not really.
So that's if you are able to mean.
Yes.
If it is less.
Yes. Right. If it's something within your ability.
Oh, okay.
If this is something within my ability, I should do it. I shouldn't, because the more things I have weighing on my heart, the worse relationships I'm going to have with others.
So you're saying you're choosing not to.
Yeah. Like, you have the ability to. You know what I mean? Like, this is something. Okay, yeah, you $20 and you wanted to go get something to eat, and now you're just going to be delayed, right? It's annoying, but is it something that you can overlook? Right, usually it's not. It's usually not that big a deal. Yes.
Does someone still get rewarded for forgiveness if there's like crazy difference in power dynamic? Like, say someone's like a servant.
Yeah.
And then they're getting oppressed by whoever is like housing them, like, but they forgive them for that.
Yeah.
They're still rewarded for it. Is it?
Yeah. So the reward is going to be al-ajr ala qadr mashaqqa. That the reward is on the amount of difficulty that's involved in it. An example, if somebody has a drinking problem and they're walking by an alcohol store, one person, he has no problem with alcohol, they cross the street together, walk, get past the store, and they cross again and they go. Are they going to get, the same action is the same, are they going to get the same reward? Right, the one who actually has a problem and is actively working to avoid it, he's going to be rewarded. This slave, he will be rewarded, but will his reward be as somebody who has full autonomy?
Not as much.
Not as much. Right, because the space he has to move is this much. There might be venues where he has a lot more room to move and his reward can be more, but concerning this particular issue, he only has this much room to move anyway. So how much is his reward going to be? It's going to be less than somebody who has full ability and full autonomy. Make sense? A thief entered Ammar ibn Yasir's tent at Siffin. Do you guys know Ma'raka Siffin? It's like one of the most famous battles during the Civil War of the companions. It was said to him, "Cut his hand, for he is from our enemies." He responded, "No, hide his fault so that Allah would cover mine on the day of judgment." Ibn Mas'ud came across a man whose money had been stolen and he was making dua against the thief, right, this person. So Ibn Mas'ud, he responded saying, "Allah, if the one who stole was in need of it, then bless him in that. And if he did it out of sin, then make it the last of his sins." Again, so a lot of this is perception, and he was trying to teach this individual to have this cognizance. Like, don't have this negative attitude. Don't even make negative du'as. If you're going to be not just positive, but you want to be positive in what you ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because an individual who's constantly asking for negative things, who is he not asking for? Who is he prohibited? The moment all of these negative dua that I'm making, who am I not making dua for? Myself. Like, I'm not making, like, first and foremost, I'm not making dua for myself. I mean, does anybody make negative dua against herself? You know what I mean? Like, like, I hope not, anyway. But these negative dua that I'm making for others, and I'm busying myself with making dua against people, the one person I've forgotten is myself, and I can never improve. You see how these things really hang us down, and they really anchor us, and they really pull us away? This is why it's important to have a light heart. Because I can overlook things, and I can just keep moving, and I can keep going. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us like that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can a homeless steal food if it's absolutely necessary?
I mean, that's between him and Allah. Legally, no.
But like, from a Sharia point of view, can you just...
The question is, like, can a homeless man steal? So,
steal food, necessary stuff, not an iPhone, right?
But there's no way for me to gauge that. Like, as an observer, even individual needs, they're different and they change. So what he's stealing, is it actually a need? That's between him and Allah. I'm not here to judge. But if there's something that's law, it's law. The only time that Umar radiallahu anhu, he lifted the punishment was why? Because there was what do you call it?
Famine?
There was a famine. It wasn't because like one or two, you know what I mean? There's a handful of homeless people. It was because there was actual famine and everybody was suffering. So if you have these individual cases, again, can Allah forgive them? Absolutely. I mean, but again, that's between them and Allah. As for what concerns us is like whatever the legal code is, this is something that has to be respected and abided by. Somebody had their hand up here? No? Okay. And I think this is the last one, but it was said that it is written in the gospel, whoever forgives the one who oppresses him has defeated the shaitan. And again, this idea, these negative attitudes like animosity, hatred, spite, jealousy, anger, these ideas of revenge, this idea of like, really channeling all this negative energy toward things. These are things that actually weigh down the heart. And these are things that we should always try to remove ourselves from in order to better ourselves. Yes?
I don't know if you heard that like story where there's this brother who was in the courtroom and his son heard it.
Yeah.
And the defendant, they got the president like this for basically he's not forgiven him.
Yeah.
That it was because of shaitan and he killed his son after doing it.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah, I mean, it happens. Like you have people like that. You have people like that, and I don't know if I could be that big, and I hope, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevent us from ever being in such a situation. But you need a big heart. Like you really need a big heart. That's tough. Any other questions? Yes.
I was going to ask, it's kind of a common question.
Sure.
And I hate to bring her up, but she passed away this week, and when there was on the news about the Queen, right?
Yeah.
And then there was some negative comments. So they interviewed a person from an African nation who said, I don't feel sad.
Okay.
Because she has taken so much from us. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, and then another one was like, if we could just sell her carriage, her gold carriage, it would solve half of the world's hunger.
I mean, maybe for the day. When it comes to like logistic distribution of some of those goods, we have a lot of money being distributed now. Where do you think it's going? Into people's pockets. Yeah, forget the food being wasted. Like it's going to administration. It's not it's not reaching the people. But anyway, it's a side political discussion.
I was thinking about that because the guy from I can't remember the African nation, but he said, "I hope she gets what she deserves." Yeah,
I think walking around with that anger, I not to say that I don't get it. I definitely I get it, but at the same time, do you think she gave him any space in her head at any point in her life?
No.
Like just be very honest. Why should we give others like free rent in our heads? Like there's so many things for us to focus on. There's so many ways for us to better ourselves. There's so many things that we can do. Like how many of you actually cared on the Queen's death? And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. That's what I'm saying. Like nobody cared. Like, it was just another event, that happened. At the same time, what benefit is it for me talking about her now? Like, like cursing her or saying that this happened or like, she was evil and da. Okay, and what? Is that going to change the reality or change anything? The only thing it's affecting, who it is affecting?
The guy who's
me, right? It's affecting me. And it's again, these things that weigh on our heart. And when we have things that weigh on our heart, it prevents us from having meaningful relationships. And those meaningful relationships, it can be with others, it can be with ourselves, and most importantly, it can be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have to cut all of these negative ties. These negative ties don't help bring us any closer. And a lot of times, like even the people who come regularly to the masjid, I wonder sometimes, it's like, what kind of negativity is going on that they're so angry at everyone. And this, alhamdulillah, that's not everyone, but there are a few people. It's just like they're coming to the masjid and they come regularly and they're coming angry, and you have to wonder and you have to ask, like, what's going on? All of these things we do, all of these acts of purity that we make, and these things that we do to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, should it not remove all the darkness and hatred and enmity from our heart? And should it not make us better people and have better relationships with others? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That the prayer, it keeps you away from vices and evil. Is not evil and vice like looking down on our brothers and sisters? This is extremely problematic. Extremely problematic. And like, again, I'm not here to doubt anyone's intention, but this is something that really requires address. Yeah, so like having these negative emotions, and it doesn't make sense. Like I don't understand. It should make us lighter people. It should make us happier. If it's making you angrier, then that it really requires a lot of introspection. I'm like, why am I getting angrier? I should be a better person. I should be more humble. When I deal with others and I deal with myself.
I'd like to add not just the Queen. How many companies profited off the colonization? How many shareholders, stockholders? Do we not bring those alongside those? Should not
us? How many of us benefited?
Through the colonization, because the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, there's some things that just aren't quantifiable.
We all speak English.
I know, right? We speak we don't speak the Queen's English. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And they say, just like you said in the beginning of the talk, you said that person doesn't truly forgive you if they decide to use some consequence, like whatever it may be, like cut ties, for example.
Sure.
So that's not true forgiveness. So if you did your part to try to amend something with somebody, they still choose not to forgive you, what happens in the next life then? That's
up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So number one, I think there's a misconception also, like, and I don't think people mean it like this, but they kind of say it like it. It's like almost like they can hold God hostage. You know what I mean? Like they're like, oh well, I will never forgive you, as if their will has some effect on Allah. Like it's so arrogant. Like if you actually like think about it, it's so arrogant. to have this belief or to feel that, oh, I have my will has some effect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. I don't think that's fair. And if a person sincerely seeking forgiveness from another, at that point, if the person is like, no, I can't forgive you, they have that right? They can do that. But what choice do I have now? I just move on. I move on. I seek forgiveness from Allah, and I keep going. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So the thing is, either there's going to be forgiveness or there's going to be recompense and accountability, right? So one way or the other, either a person is going to be forgiven or they'll be held accountable. Accountability can be through some type of temporary punishment where they're thrown into the hellfire, or it can be these people can be from those people who are on the plains, on Ashab al-A'raf, what is between paradise and heaven. I mean, and the thing is, because it's like an unseen discussion, Allah knows the reality of how that actually plays out. The only thing we can do is try to do the best in this world and try to keep things as balanced as possible. Yeah, Fazia.
My question is related to that because I've heard people say, Allah forgives, but if the person doesn't forgive you, which is related, and maybe you already answered it, that Allah can say, yes, you can go to heaven, but then you can't get in because this person said
no, that's what I'm saying. Do you practically think anyone can hold Allah hostage?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I think it makes people feel good, because yeah, there's so many ways that it can play out, right? There can be a transfer of deeds, there can be a punishment. Allah knows. Allah knows what the reality is. But the only thing I can say for surety and certainty is that you can't hold Allah hostage. It's not He's going to send you wherever you deserve to go. Period. Regardless of how I feel about it. He's like, man, he got in. You know what I mean? Who cares? It doesn't matter what I say. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's salty. Oh, man. How'd this guy make it? You know, it is up to Allah. He's forever merciful, and He's forever, knowledgeable and wise. He knows who deserves it and who doesn't, regardless of how I feel, regardless of how I think. Yes.
But what if that person's your grandparents' parents? Isn't that an actual not gonna forgive you for I'm supposed to do?
So do certain people's lack of forgiveness have more weight? I don't want to. So the problem I have with this is there's a lot of cultural baggage that's associated with that. You know what I mean? And it's I will never forgive your children, and it's what? I don't like that blackmail. I don't think that's a healthy way of dealing with problems or issues that arise. It's if you marry this guy, I will never. You know what I mean? Really? Come on, man. Is this how you want to go out? Is this the hill you really want to die on? Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's what it is. It's just blackmail. It's okay, well, I'm interested in this girl. Well, where is she from? Somewhere else. No, I'm not even okay. Why don't you talk to her? Nah, I'm not even trying to talk to her. It's bro, come on, man. What? And if you dare, no, it's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. I'm sorry.
I'm sure you've been in encounters like that. Are you allowed to officiate legally, or
No, I mean legally, if all parties agree, right? So if people, people are can you go talk to my father? I'd be no, that's not going to happen, because he'll just slam the phone in my face. He'll be I don't care who you are. But if he's willing to come to my office, he's coming into my space, and I can actually address it, and I can talk to him. Saying that, it's usually just being very honest. It usually boils down to the choice of the two fiancés on what they want to do. So sometimes they want to overturn their parents. Sometimes unfortunately there's no right or wrong answer. But a lot of times I'll tell them things okay, hey, listen, there might be a chance where your kids don't see their grandparents. I'm just being really honest with you. But is this relationship worth it for you? And I've had people say yes. They're just yeah, I've been abused. I've had a bad thing. Blah blah. I don't care if they make that choice. They are so oppressive that they're not letting me build in these ways. I've had fathers tried holding on to their daughters until they're in their huh? What happened? Like, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's I don't know what it is, but it's like, yeah, it's like, no, she has to like get her third post-grad degree before. Yeah, PhD, okay, like 27, 28, all right, no problem. It's like, you know, 35, and it's like, no, she still needs to do more. The other thing that baffles me is like these girls who agree. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're like, yeah, you know, I do have to get a career. America stop you from doing that. Like it doesn't. It's not a preventative measure that's going to stop your life. Like, you know, your life doesn't stop when you get married. Like, yeah, it changes. There's no doubt, but it's not going to prevent it. Yes.
What about if like a person's in that situation, like a parent blackmails their child and says that, you know, because I'm wrong, how they curse you as a parent?
Oh wow. That's blackmail. That's blackmail. No, it's not. Like, unless you're actually doing something oppressive, like, you know, if you're physically abusing your mother, yes, right? Other than that, no. Like, you have to be completely in order for something like that to actually apply and actually happen. It's not. I don't understand. Like, I really don't understand. Like, how it's like, okay, we want to teach you to be free. We're going to teach you to be independent. And then when it's time, we don't want you to be free or independent. Okay, like this. You know, you baked your own cake and you're mad that it's chocolate instead of vanilla. Like, like literally, it's beyond me. Yeah.
If the parents can actually object if it's the wrong marriage.
Listen, I've had parents come to me like, hey, listen, Imam, he doesn't have a job. He does drugs. Like, I'll be like, okay, yeah, you're an idiot. Why are you marrying this guy? You know what I mean? Like, and that makes sense to me. Be like, okay, well, why aren't you marrying your daughter off to this guy? It's like, oh, well, he's not from our tribe.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just stupid.
I was like, okay, do you have, like, no, it's like, okay, do you have a problem with his? Do you have a problem with his deen? No, do you have a problem with his deen? Do you have a problem with No, I'm saying, like, do you have a problem with his deen? Do you have a problem with his manners? Do you have a problem with, like, how he carries himself? Do you have a problem with his status? Like, okay, do you have a problem with any of these things? No. Like what? I don't understand. Like, what is stopping you? You know, alhamdulillah, the culture is changing. You have more parents who are more open. You have more parents who are more willing. Like, just a few weeks ago, there was a marriage between like a Somali and a Pakistani brother, and I didn't praise them. I was like, you guys didn't do anything. Yeah. No, I was like, you guys, you know, I mean, like, you're both American. You're gonna marry whoever you're attracted to. I was happier with the parents. I'm like, you know, a lot of time, and the father, he came up to me later. He was like, man, you don't know the number of Somalis that came up to me and they said, what are you doing?
I'm not going to name them, but believe me, I had a conversation last week after we left your class.
Yeah.
There is a young Somali sheikh. He's married, with children. But I was in shock. I changed his mind by giving him da'wah. I said, you're supposed to give me a da'wah.
Yeah.
I said, if you are a sheikh and you went to Alim school, but you are saying I object Somali girls marrying foreigners. This is my question is, what is a foreigner? All these kids are American. None of them even, like, half of them don't even speak Somali or know how to eat, like, what Somali food tastes like. Yeah. If they don't object you coming from another country, it is the tribe. Somalis to me, I mean, I grew up here, but I believe my
it's everyone. No, it's everyone's Zamzam. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mia, and then go ahead. Shema, sorry. My name's yes. Yeah. Allahu Akbar.
In that case, right, parent, either or mother or father,
Yeah.
child, don't marry.
Yeah.
No valid reason.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that they're, from a different country. What do you do then if the child doesn't want to disobey?
If they don't want to disobey?
The parent is just
No, they have, like, listen, at the end of the day, everybody's free. They have a choice, right? Slavery has been abolished. That a child has a choice whether or not they want to disobey. Here, I won't even use disobey is the wrong word, or whether or not they disagree. right? Because this is a disagreement issue. This person, he's religious, he's practicing, he can financially provide for me, X, Y, Z. The Prophet ﷺ said, marry your daughters to someone who has deen and khuluq, and if you don't, you will only spread fitna in the land. This is Sahih Hadith. If I find someone who is good for my daughter and I'm not marrying, I am creating, remember the power vacuum we were talking about? That's exactly what happens. And then we talk about, oh, what are the problems we have in the community? It's because we are not marrying our children off.
This is the
Yeah.
fitna,
Yeah. 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 I know, and it's, well, you feel that you see, it's, oh, well, they're young and blah, blah. Okay, yeah, they're young. I completely understand. But are both parents willing to step in and support them? And if the answer is yes, why are you not marrying them?
Well, define young.
Yeah.
What about in the case of like, let's just say that I've heard that, even though the immediate family might not be racist,
Yeah.
it could be that the external family might be racist. And
Yeah.
of course you have to look at your children, right? You want your children to be accepted.
Sure. So are they going to go back? Are they going to go back to those countries where they're going to face the racism?
Let's just say those individuals, even in the community, let's say like there's a big Pakistani community,
Yeah.
there's a small Somali community,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah, yeah.
Arab community. So it's like you're looking at a trajectory of like the law and
How many masajid are in a 5-mile radius? I'm saying, no, so like if you have support of your immediate family, then they are going into it with the understanding like, hey, we're going to have to defend my son or I'm going to have to defend my daughter. And that's fine, because you're voluntarily, again, this is a voluntary relationship, and I'm going to stand for my values, and the truth, it always triumphs, always. And if you know that others are wrong, and the moment that we start confronting people, you know what happens? People back down. People always back down. And as long as if the immediate family is okay with it, who cares what the extended family says? You know why? Because they're not going to contribute anything. They're just really not. They're not going to do anything for you. The immediate family is going to be, if the husband loses a job, who's going to be the one that looks out for him? It's going to be the immediate family. Extended family is not going to care. They'll make dua for him. But it's the immediate family that's going to be the one that looks out for him. You know what I mean? So like a lot of these things, they're very important to keep in mind.
But sometimes
Yeah.
they're involved in the family. Like you have a lot of cousins that come over. Or there's certain people that
Again, is the immediate family willing to stand up for their son or daughter or not? That's it. If they're willing to stand up for them, it doesn't matter. Because they know every time that they bring up something, they're like, I told you not to talk about it. They're going to stand up and be like, listen, I don't appreciate that. Oh, and not just that, what happens is it ends up becoming really ugly for the other people. Be like, oh, didn't they marry? Aren't they from the same tribe? And didn't they get divorced a year later? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that stuff happens. It's real. So again, if the immediate families are for it, like, I don't see a problem. I don't see an issue with it. And as for like disagreeing with the parents, it's a disagreement. That's what it is. There's no right, and I'm telling you, there's no right or wrong answer. Meaning that if the daughter or the son decides to disagree with their parents and go forward with it, and they've taken counsel from other elders in the community, go for it. And if you're like, no man, like my parents are really important, I really need them in my life, that's your decision too. There's no right or wrong answer.
So for a female
that
needs like the wali to marry the mom and the wali's the father, he said no,
it needs to be explored. Allah knows best. Allahu a'lam. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.